Overall agenda here. So basically what I wanted to cover is just an intro on attribution more broadly. What is it? Why does it exist? A quick overview in terms of like the actual benefits, of what exactly partnership attribution can do for you guys. The core KPIs that I typically see out there that are the most impactful for partnership, organizations in terms of what you should be tracking and what's, like more optional. How to measure, and I kind of broke this out into like a crawl, walk, run approach, if you will. Really more along the lines of, like, okay, what's a basic, setup that you can do very quickly if you guys aren't tracking anything today? What's more of like an intermediate setup where you can use awesome tools like Kiflow, for example, to go ahead and actually start tracking everything. Plug for Steven here. There's other PRMs that we'll cover as well. But then also like, what's the advanced way of doing this? And like the world that a lot of folks have probably heard of, like multi-touch attribution. So there's like a whole world of like sales attribution modeling that's definitely more of like the run approach when we think about crawl, walk, run. But I want to cover that because I do think it's where the future is for any type of sales attribution modeling. So I'll tell you a little bit about how like you can, account for your partnerships and those types of models as well. And then we'll wrap up with just some pitfalls to avoid, given my experience in the space. And then any questions, but again, for the questions, feel free to jump in live there too. So let me stop here for a second. Anything that anybody wanted to add, alter, adjust to this agenda, we can keep it flexible.
I don't know, but if we'll have time, I was curious about like maybe if we have time, maybe share what some people are doing or thinking about for attribution.
Yeah.
So like get some consensus on what people are thinking. So
Eric, actually, well, you know what? Let's do that now because I want to actually level set and understand where everybody's kind of like how you guys are thinking about it right now. So, do you want to kick things off and just tell us how you guys are doing your attribution model, Eric, and then we can just go around the room real quick.
Yeah, so I think we're still early, but what we've landed on, I guess for today, or what seems to stick is we definitely want partner sourced, 100%, to try to at least track that. And then for partner influenced, we're sort of trying to figure that out. But I think because the sales team for us is so large and spread out, we're trying to figure out how we can track that in an efficient way. So that's, I think, where we're struggling. But the partner sourced one seems to be like we have that pretty dialed in. Okay. Any more details you want than that, Adam, or is that good?
No, I think that's helpful. I guess the only follow-up question that I have there is like, okay, so you are tracking partner source today and you're looking for help on the influence side, or you're not tracking partner source today?
No, exactly what you said. We are tracking partner sourced. The partner influence one is the challenge.
Cool. Got it. We'll definitely touch on that in the preso. Anybody else?
Hey, so one thing that we're running into now is that as we set up alliances, and so this is mostly influenced, right? So partner sourced is relatively straightforward. And a couple of nuances, but we can talk about that. But the influenced, so like with AWS, I have, we have a marketplace listing so that customers can buy through marketplace. And so what I'm having a hard time with is actually attributing influenced, where, a customer comes to us maybe through the website, and then actually buys because we have options available like marketplace to purchase directly through. Literally, it's a click through, and it draws down their AWS commit and everything, right? Yep. So, at what point, what qualifies for influenced when a deal comes in through marketing or whatever?
Yeah, we'll definitely touch on that. There's a variety of different ways that you can account for that. So let's, I think, feel free to stop me at the point in the conversation because I think that depending on how you want to account for that in your model, you can do a couple different things, whether like last touch if you're looking for sourcing, or even actually like applying a certain amount of credit to that individual touch point in more of like a multi-touch model.
So we are. I'm founder of Nacho Nacho, and so I've before my current startup, my previous startup was acquired by Scrib, and I was running performance marketing. So we used to struggle a lot with attribution. So this is a very, very top of mind topic for me. We at Nacho Nacho, we are a partner as well as we look for partners. We're on both sides. And we're using at the moment, when we are the partner, we're using an attribution model, which is different from anything that I had seen before. Mm-hmm. And the way we attribute referrals to us, to ourselves, when we are the partner, is using credit cards, virtual credit cards. And that is we found it to be a very black and white attribution system, where basically if our customers pay the vendor with a credit card that we issue, then we count that as attributed to us. And if they don't, if they go in using any other method to the vendor, then we don't count it as an attribution to us. And because we're the credit card issuer, we get very precise data, both who the buyer is and who the seller is. So we can do basically 100% attribution based on that combination of buyer and seller. So the buyer has to be a buyer of Nacho Nacho, on Nacho Nacho, and the seller needs to be registered on Nacho Nacho, needs to have an account. So I'd love to, at some point, towards the end of your presentation, maybe, get your feedback on what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. I mean, I guess and I don't want to go too far. We can take this offline too. But how are you getting the customer to leverage, those virtual credit cards?
So they issue those cards in their Nacho Nacho accounts, and they can issue as many cards as they want. And typically, they would issue a separate card for every vendor.
Interesting. Okay, so it's kind of like it's like affiliate program one step further. Interesting. Okay, cool. Yeah, let's loop back around to that because I think that
to generalize a little bit. So Sanjay and I can talk endlessly about virtual cards, but actually an interesting conversation to talk about, which is a big problem in partnership attribution, is correlation versus causation, which is a big problem in partnership attribution. So don't forget into that. That would be useful to know.
Yeah, Sunir, I was going to say, it sounds like your solution could also help out there too.
Sanjay and I have a lot to talk about because we're in the same market.
Sure.
The product is awesome. I love it. So that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Look at all these synergies. I love it. All right, guys. Okay, cool. Feel free to jump in, but that's super helpful, just a level set on where everybody's at. But yeah, let's keep the conversation fluid. A little bit about me. So previously, I think like what's most relevant here is I've been at a company called Branch Metric for the past 5 years, and we actually built out first off, it's a mobile attribution company, one of the leading mobile attribution companies in the world. But also, we had very similar sales attribution modeling issues where we applied kind of the lens that we've developed through building out our own attribution tooling to really trying our best to kind of solve this problem. And it was a painful process that took us over a year. So my goal of this conversation is to hopefully condense some of that and save you some of the scars that we faced and give you any of the best practices that we learned. At the end of the day, as you've already kind of heard, there's a variety of different ways in which you can go about doing attribution. Neither one of them are going to be a one-size-fits-all approach for every organization, depending on your business model, your transaction size, your, how quickly your sales cycles are, your ACV, like all those variables are really going to depend on how you want to create your custom, attribution model. So, while we can definitely use, this session and the session next week to go into those more specific issues, just know that I'm also happy to, take this offline with any of you guys if you want to just ping me on Slack in the CSA, and we can jam out on your specific use cases if they're a little bit more nuanced. So, Cool. So a little bit of an overview just to level set for everyone. At the end of the day, like attribution is basically just the action of ascribing like an outcome to a particular activity. So this can be used in a variety of different ways. Like marketers will use this for when somebody sees a Facebook ad. How do they apply the credit and actually say that Facebook drove a purchase or something? But sales folks essentially want to see whenever they close a deal, how do they go about saying, hey, how much of this was coming from the salesperson? How much of this was coming from the SDR? How much of this was coming from the marketer? How much of this was coming from the partnership team? All of those are questions that you need like an attribution foundation in place to really understand who is actually driving that sale. So while the focus of this conversation is really going to be specifically focused on, partnership attribution, just know that it lives within a much wider universe of just understanding like who's responsible for a specific action, whether that be in marketing, whether that be in sales, whether that be in a variety of different industries. The understanding of each one of those and applying like a specific model on top of it, which we'll get into a little bit more detail here, is kind of just an overarching world in which like attribution lives in. So the reason why this is important is, and pardon if this is just super high level, but I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page here. The reason why it's important is that if you don't know, what is actually like causing a specific type of action at your company, it's really tough to optimize and understand where you should spend your limited time and resources. So if you can put a good, attribution model in place, particularly on the partnership side, where usually a lot of folks are just not really accounting for their partnership activities in the best possible way. If you can actually really start to put that partnership, attribution in place, you can start getting the credit that you deserve. And as we're all aware of, like partnerships, whenever you actually get them involved on deals or partners more broadly, it leads to new pipeline, faster deal cycles. You can close deals faster for bigger, like for more money. So it's just more like we already know that, partnership organizations are doing this, but without the actual data backing it up, you're really, you're kind of just, sitting out there, oh yeah, by the way, we're driving all this value. And then people are gonna be like, well, I don't see a report, so it doesn't matter. So it really requires getting all of that data infrastructure in place so that you get all the credit for the like awesome work that you're already doing. Any questions here on the high level overview or just the benefits of attribution? I know this is like the 101, but I just want to make sure we check the box here. Cool. Okay, cool. So a couple of like the core KPIs, and you guys have already kind of heard this come up in the conversation so far. The primary KPIs, which people track, are really sourced revenue and influenced revenue. So we'll double click on both of these, and then we can jump to the other, other metrics that I see that are pretty common. But sourced is fairly black and white. If somebody drove you business that you would not have previously received otherwise, then that business was sourced. And that business, is, for example, if a partner introduces you directly to a client, or if the partner, in the case of, like a deal registration or a lead submission, for example, goes ahead and introduces you to an opportunity that was previously non-existent in your CRM, for example, like, that is sourced revenue. I'd say the vast majority of organizations that I've seen out there are tracking sourced revenue. One, because it's the easiest to track, again, because it's very black and white. But two, because it's also, just one of the most important metrics in terms of, okay, how much business is actually coming from the partnership organization. The second big one is influenced revenue. So influenced revenue is, I would argue, the least, it's the lesser understood of the two, but if done properly, it's actually like just as impactful, as potentially sourced revenue. The issue is that a lot of folks like just don't account for influence revenue properly. So influence could be like, for example, if a partner gives you a recommendation to the client, or if a partner gives you, you sync up with the partner and they give you information that, this client's like in market for your solution. All of those, particularly if you can add multiple different partners like involved on one deal, can be just as impactful in getting a user to actually, purchase your product. Because as we all know, like a buyer's journey is not linear, it's not just because they source something that they're automatically going to purchase it. There's also going to be that entire buying cycle in between. And I think the holy grail here is, okay, get a partner to source it, but then also get multiple different partner influence touch points, preferably different people along that buyer's journey, so that you're getting like this surround sound around the customer and they're hearing from your entire partner ecosystem, which is going to increase the probability of you closing that deal. So influence is one that I am like a huge believer in. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to kind of account for that influenced revenue in your attribution modeling as well. The other couple metrics that we'll touch on tangentially, and by the way, there's tens, if not hundreds of different metrics out there that you can account for. So I just kind of boiled down 3 major ones over here. But when you're particularly getting started, and we hear this frequently, like with folks who are just getting a partner program off the ground, it's like, okay, how many, like you just want to track basic things, how many total partnerships do you have? What's the lifetime value of somebody who gets involved with a or like the lifetime value of an opportunity when somebody gets involved with a partner versus somebody who doesn't, or like churn reduction and retention. These 3 partnerships are really more relevant to more like product or like tech partnerships. But if you do have any of those product or tech partnerships, or even other, partnerships more broadly, but those are usually the primary ones here, it's going to allow you to understand, like, okay, when that partner is involved, like what are the other benefits, more down funnel from just the actual sale, like post sale, how is that affecting your business? So we're not going to touch on these in too much detail, but I'm more than happy to speak to these if anybody has any questions. I know that was a mouthful, so let me stop for a second. Any questions on the core KPIs here, whether the primary or the other, before we proceed?
So I actually look at the sourced and influenced I think a little differently than kind of what you talked about. Not sourced. I mean, sourced is just anything coming in from a partner. But influence revenue is something that the way I look at it, is something that is marketing source or other source than partner generated.
Yep. But
a partner has helped us win the account in some way.
Got it. Yeah, I could see how you could do that. I mean, there's a couple different things to note there. Is like, one, I guess is the reason why you're doing that, like for purposes of like channel conflict, where the marketing team is the one who's like, or let me peel that back one layer further. Like, why is that the case for you?
Well, so and these are mostly implementation partners that I'm talking about, right? So, and then honestly, on our technical partners, most all of them are influenced because they're not like part of the deal. Our implementation partners they bring in a deal, they have the relationship, they're making a recommendation for us. Like it's true source revenue. Yep. But like when we had a deal a couple of months ago that it was stalled, and basically what we did is we brought a partner to the deal and had them create a strategy and some core design that then they applied to the platform, and that's what helped us move that client over and say, oh, okay, here's the everything we needed to make this thing work. And so, that client then moved forward and procured the deal through us, right? That's that partner. We brought the partner to the deal, so it wasn't sourced, but they absolutely moved the deal from a stall to actually getting signed.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, that's no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think, so the reason why I describe it the way that it is like, source usually being like the first touch, if you will, is like, it comes down to the actual attribution model in which you use. So like, if we zoom back out real quick, like, the buyer is going to have all the different touch points across their buyer journey up until point of purchase. Usually folks will treat like the first touch, i.e. when the opportunity is created, which is like this first model over here, is the one who actually sources the opportunity. So if that's, marketing, if that's partnerships, if that's whoever actually goes and creates the opportunity, is the first touch. And assuming, that you're using a first touch model, then they'll be the ones who actually source the opportunity. However, there's a variety of other different models out there that you can account for, that will also allow you to, like distribute who's responsible for each piece or like each different touch point. And that's where you get into like the more comprehensive, like, multi-touch models. And all that multi-touch means is that rather than just being, completely binary, in terms of like, okay, this person touched it first, like, so they should get all of the credit, which has downsides as well. Like channel conflict is one of the ones I mentioned, because everybody in your organization is going to be fighting for that first touch. The real way of actually accounting for this is, or the proper way, in my personal opinion, is like more of a multi-touch model, where if you're tracking all of those individual touch points that happen across that buying journey, you can actually, say, hey, marketing, had them attend this webinar. And even though maybe that was the first touch point, they actually didn't really convert until the partner introduced them to us. But then they also had like, these 5 other different touch points. And when you, are tracking everything, you can go ahead and actually apply weightings to each different ones. Like, so say the introduction is worth 10 points, the webinar is worth 3 points, the SDR email is worth 2 points, AE meeting is worth 5 points. Like, then you can actually put that into like a sales attribution algorithm, and that could spit out at the end of the deal cycle, hey, partnerships drove 60% of this, marketing drove 20% of this, sales drove 20% of this. So it comes down to how you're actually like what type of model that you're using.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's just so valuable what you just said there, because I mean, I know I've had it, just challenges in terms of like also motivating each of those segments to do their part. It's like, well, if I know marketing brought it in, they're going to get the full commission or whatever. Or if a partner brought it in, I'm not touching it because I'm not going to get compensated for it, which stalls deals all the time. But if it's a multi-touch, it's like they're all incentivized to do their part, right? And they know it's not going to be 100%, but they're like, hey, I'm going to get 15% for doing just this touch point that's in front of me. But the challenge is like, how do you track and convert all those things? Like maybe you can touch on like what you're actually using, day to day to like, make this work, right?
100%. And to that point, like I want to bifurcate here the 2 different things. So there's the underlying data, of like all these different touch points that are happening across your partner journey, like, the buyer's journey. But then there's also the attribution model. So we're going to cover each one of these separately, but just know that without like, if you don't have your right data infrastructure in place, like it's going to be garbage in, garbage out on the model, regardless of what you do. So like, it's really important that like you're tracking all of these individual touch points, so that you can feed that into whichever one of these models makes the most sense for your business. And it's going to vary, for your, also like depending on how sophisticated you want to get, because something like a multi-touch model can take, months, if not like longer to configure properly. So yeah, there's a lot of different variables over here. I'm speaking, more, broadly, just for sake of time. But again, like, like this is something that I just want to give you guys the high level, and then I'm more than happy to dive into individual use cases too. And Evan, I think somebody might have posted something. So if there's a question,
yeah. No, it's all good. Just keep going. I think that multi-touch model honestly could be a session of its own. Like that is so much there. But yeah.
Cool. Okay, cool. So yeah, let's cover the basic version. So say that if you are not tracking anything right now, which is there anybody in the crowd who's not tracking any partnership activity right now? You don't have to, feel bad. It's totally cool. A lot of organizations aren't. Is there anybody who's not currently tracking anything? Okay, experts. Cool. Then I'll gloss over this just quickly. So yeah, I mean, the basic version of this is just sourced, and we kind of touched on this earlier, is if you want to track one metric, like I'd encourage you to just track sourced, because sourced at the end of the day is going to allow you to basically say, definitively, hey, we drove this type of we drove this opportunity. And as long as you have, like a way of tracking this, which could be as simple as a spreadsheet, an Airtable, or even just including it in your CRM, being able to actually track all of that is what's going to allow you to make sure that whether it's the end of the quarter or the end of the year, you can go back to your team and definitively say, hey, we sourced all of this business. A cool way of actually measuring this too is like there's even like Airtable templates and stuff out there that if you're not already tracking any of this sort of stuff in your CRM, like you can also just spin up something pretty quickly just to actually go ahead and just make sure that you have like a good way of keeping, all of this data in one place. And Airtable is also really cool. They like announced, maybe a month or two ago, like all types of different integrations. So not only can you track it in here, but if you wanted to push it to other data sources or other types of like attribution modeling software, like you can do it straight from Airtable. But since everybody is already set up, let's focus more of our time here on like the intermediate and the advanced. So what you'll see here is like for intermediate, basically what I would argue is intermediate is like, okay, now not only are you tracking the sourced, but you're now layering in the influenced. And understanding the influenced also has like a variety of different ways in which you can do that. But, just zooming back out again, while sourced is, allowing you to understand who drove the opportunity, influenced is when you're thinking about is like all those different touch points across the buyer's journey of where your partners are getting involved. And they can be incredibly impactful. And I've even seen like statistics where, if you can get like one or two partners involved, for example, across that buyer's journey, like it increases the probability of you closing that deal by up to like 50%, so a lot of people and too, like that we've even had on the partnered podcast will attest to this. Henry Prevet is one who I can think of off the top of my head. But there's a few others who like will basically tell you these, or Lean Plum, Andrew, he's like, will also tell you how impactful like influence is. At the end of the day, like the reason why I would argue that you should be accounting for influence is as a partnership professional, like if you're not, then you're leaving a lot of credit on the table, because at the end of the day, by nature of you having these partnerships, like these folks are doing this and driving value for your organization regardless. It's just a matter of whether or not you're actually tracking it. And if you're not tracking it, then you're not getting the full credit that you really should deserve for all the efforts that you're putting into these partnerships. So influence is something that I want to spend a little bit of time on, but just for the tooling piece, like there's a variety of different ways of doing it. There's, CRMs, for example, being able to, you can actually, like just right alongside the like sourced, if you put it on the opportunity, you can also just have a couple tags for influenced. I would encourage you, if you're going to go that route and have it directly on the opportunity, make sure that you have like at least 3 fields for influence, because it's going to be very frequent that like multiple partners will be involved on like a single opportunity for most businesses. So if you don't have multiple fields there, then you're not going to be actually getting the full picture. You're going to constantly have to switch that out and try and, account for multiple different people when there's only like one field. Another interesting one here that from the marketing side that a lot of folks will use is just marketing automation, predominantly Marketo. So I know that we're focused on partnership attribution, but just to kind of offer you a little bit of, examples of how marketers are doing this, they will basically track every single time that a lead or like, anybody associated with your opportunity has attended a webinar or has read a case study or has visited your website, all of that stuff like that a marketing automation platform like Marketo can do for you. And it all gets back to that point of, looking and making sure that all of the data is actually there, because marketers have done this down to a science now, where they can really understand, okay, hey, if somebody, visits the website, reads 2 case studies, attends a webinar, like they have a 3x higher probability of closing, versus partnerships organizations are I think you're starting to see a lot of that tooling come to play, but like historically it's it's really just this sourced and influenced, but I do think over the next couple of years, like you're going to see a lot more of like what I kind of call partnership automation, where you're going to be able to understand, okay, every single time that a partner gets involved on a deal. The other important thing is like PRMs will really start to become impactful in like kind of this intermediate and even frankly the expert, or advanced like ways to measure. And they're really important in the sense that, they can allow you to account for particularly the transactional partnerships that you have. So if there's any type of, I like to think about partnerships in terms of like two different, subsets. One is the transactional, where, if a partner is directly, driving that revenue to your website, or directly, giving that, that client a affiliate link, for example, it's very, obvious that they're driving that business. But then there's also the non-transactional component where, a partner could, provide the recommendation or provide you your team, your go-to-market team, the information, which is really, more non-transactional. And you'll see that in a lot of like tech integrations or product partnerships, where by nature of the tech integration or product partnership, there's inherent interests to go to market together that aren't necessarily like, hey, if you drive X lead, like I'll give you Y dollars, it's really more quid pro quo, where it's like, hey, we're already, partnering together. And in my sales cycle, I heard that they might be interested in Kpis. So I'm just going to forward you this lead, doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have to pay you for it. But they, the expectation there is that if you hear something about them, like you'll go back and you'll give them that business too. So the PRMs, I think, do a really good job at like transactional. They also do a pretty good job at the non-transactional too, but there's other pieces on the non-transactional part that I'm happy to speak to. And when you think about a PRM, like the real stuff to be cognizant of in terms of the attribution modeling is really these three main segments. So it's the affiliate linking, which allows you to, provide any of your partners an actual affiliate link, that whether it's using UTM params or something along those lines, it can actually track who specifically drove, that conversion event on your, for any type of product that you're selling. But there's also deal registration and like lead submission. So deal registration, is where if somebody refers you or, like actually refers you any type of business, they can go to your deal registration page. They can type in, hey, I submitted, Nike as a client to you, so that it allows your team to actually go through and be like, oh, okay, it looks like partner, submitted this. And then we went ahead and we created the opportunity. Therefore, we should pay them out XYZ dollars. The other big one is like lead submission, which, allows you to also just understand who's submitting any type of leads. It's kind of like almost in a derivative of like deal registrations in a lot of ways. But when you think about like a PRM, when you're tracking particularly these these partnerships in which you're going to be compensating them, a PRM could be a complete lifesaver for those. Otherwise, it becomes very, very difficult to track any of that.
I think another thing that, I don't know if you're going to mention this later, but PRMs also do a good job of tracking money that's spent, like MDF funds and then marketing campaigns, and actually tracking the results within the PRM. So I think that's another way you can really track results with PRMs.
100%. Yeah. And Stephen, I mean, you're the resident PRM expert here. So if you have anything to add, feel free.
Add to Kelly's comment, I was going to say the other thing we try to use it for is kind of learning and development. So if we're working on enablement for the partner, we put a lot of like training material, battle cards, collateral, to show like how the partner can leverage, the two solutions together, or even testimony or case studies that they can use as PDFs for their sales motion too.
Adam, for the difference between deal registration and lead submission, I mean, obviously, one, that there's a filter where they're making the deal registration and then somebody's looking at it and then creating that opportunity, and then it goes on. With lead submission, it's kind of going directly into what would be like a Salesforce or whatever, where, and then if it closes, they get compensated. So there's no filter in between. Do you see a downfall or an upside to using one or the other, like having that, like that person as a filter?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it comes down to like qualified versus unqualified in a lot of cases, you know. So for I think lead submission, or at least the way that I've seen it utilized most in the past, is more of like an agency, you know, relationship where you can automatically just submit that and then they can qualify or unqualify it. I do think like, I mean, at the end of the day, if your business is going to be heavy on any of these types of like transactional relationships, then yeah, I'd highly encourage a PRM. And by the way, I'm like totally underselling a lot of the value as as everyone's kind of illustrating here. Like PRMs are valuable in a myriad of different ways. For purposes of this presentation, like I'm keeping it super high level, but there's a variety of other benefits there. So whether you're using like a partner stack or an all bound, or you know, like a Kiflo, or you know, in partner, like there's a variety of different solutions out there, and their benefits range, you know, obviously not just this transactional component, but also to like the partner portals, you know, and being able to actually do like the LMS or training programs and all of that stuff. So, so yeah, not intentionally trying to downplay PRMs here, because they're extremely important in the entire ecosystem.
You know, I don't know about anybody else, but I've got a deal registration page up that's, you know, specifically for partners. They all know about it. And I rarely have partners go through the deal registration page. They inevitably end up just messaging me because they've got, you know, 13 technology partners, you know, that like, and I'm one of them. And inevitably what happens is they'll talk to their client on the ground about Crown Peak, and they have a, you know, a whole, you know, they'll include slides from us in presentations to the client. The client will end up like looking us up on the internet, doing a chat session, and then, you know, we'll run the lead through marketing. And so I have to go back and kind of unpack it a little bit. Like that's my experience with deal registration. I don't know if anybody else is different.
Yeah, it's 100% right. So I'm posting now a bunch of interviews I did with agencies on the CSA blog and YouTube. I'm not sure if anyone touched on this exactly, but I've done a lot of interviews with agencies on this exact issue. But the overall problem is that they sell time, and no offense to all of you, because you know I love all my members equally, but they hate all of you because you waste so much of your time. They don't want to spend any minute of their day dealing with you. You're just taking from them. The only reason they want to do dual registration, okay, some of them care about commissions, but most of them don't. It's because of the end running to the client, where they lose control of their client. They need to make sure that your sales team, support team know that they're involved in the deal. Otherwise, you're going to, you know, embarrass them or screw up or make things complicated. That is the dominating reason. So these kind of like games around attribution around dollars is kind of secondary and a bit silly. So you should give them the attribution however they want it, so that the communication works together as a partner. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, that's my experience as well. It's like, I mean, even in those instances, like a lot of folks will use like a shared Slack channel or something along those lines, and they'll like pass you the business, and you know, afterwards, like they might call it out, but you know, to Saneera's point, like some of them may care about, you know, the payout or the commission. Some of them might not, you know. So it's yeah, it's going to come down to like each individual relationship there.
One more story on that is HubSpot is famously unwilling to pay out commissions to their agency partners, but agency partners don't care. What they want is the channel team to work with them, because they'll lose the clients. So like, there's attribution for dollars in internal accounting, but there's attribution for just good behavior. So you may have to separate those systems.
Yeah, I think giving them like almost like an incentive to do that deal registration, and like one being is that when you do register a deal, you are attached to that lead, and you get notifications when deals are moving forward, when things are upgrading, downgrading, like you're attached to it. So that way, them just emailing you, hey, these guys, I'm putting these guys on, that's not going to get them that, right? So by giving them that like incentive, like if you fill this 3-line form out, you're going to be attached to this, and you know you're going to get the notifications. Something like that usually does a little bit of a better job at getting them to go through the system, as opposed to just messaging or emailing you, I found.
Cool.
Keep going, Adam.
All right. Okay, cool. Now let's get to the meat of it, what everyone's been waiting for. Multi-touch modeling. So we kind of touched on this, tangentially, but a couple big heuristics is I'm biased because I've been in attribution for 5 years, but I think that this is where the entire market is going. The idea of only ascribing, a particular touch point as hey, the end all be all, I think is more, well, in my opinion, will become more archaic over the coming years, because at the end of the day, it's the reality of any type of sale or conversion event, for that matter, is that there's going to be a lot of different things that will influence that across the entire journey. So you have to account for each one of those respectively to really understand the more holistic picture. So multi-touch attribution modeling, though, as I mentioned earlier, is really only as good as the good data that you provide it. I kind of touched on this earlier, but sales attribution, has always been pretty strong in the sense that it became more of a science. And there's tools such as Outreach, who will track all of your emails, or Salesforce, obviously, being able to track all different types of events from a CRM perspective. But marketing also kind of soon followed after that. And Jay McBain, on a podcast that I did recently, kind of really alluded towards this, is sales became more of a science and marketing became more of a science. And I think that now we're going through the phase that partnerships are becoming more of a science, which is awesome for all of us, because what that allows us to do is now really understand each one of the granular touch points that a partnership team is doing, similar to marketing and sales, so that you can really understand, okay, what are the impact of each one of your partners, how is that affecting your deals, which ultimately will dictate where you spend more of your time and your efforts. So when you think about it, this is, I'll walk through kind of how we solve this at Branch, just to, transparently kind of make sure everyone's on the same page here. We actually solved this, in a specific way that eventually had rolled out to become a tool that I'm now working on, full time, called partner.io, because it was such an issue for our organization. So there's what I call partnership automation tools in that sense. But there's also, at the end of the day, when you hear about multi-touch attribution, specifically on the sales side, there's really two big players that I see come up most frequently. One of which is Visible, the other one's Engagio. And what these tools allow you to do is ingest all of the data from all the different places, so from Outreach, from Salesforce, from, Marketo, from any PRM or other tool that you're leveraging, and then apply that weighting on it, or the multi-touch attribution algorithm that you'd like to use. You can apply that on top of it, so that ultimately, once the attribution model runs, it will spit out on whether on your entire pipeline or even individual deals, how impactful each part of your organization is on each one of those individual deals or the overall pipeline. So when you think about a multi-touch attribution stack, there's really, there's the individual tools that are going out there and collecting all of the data on each one of those touch points, the Marketos, the Outreaches, or Partnered, for example, for partnership teams. But what you really need to do is, layer on that actual attribution modeling software on top of it. That's going to crank all of that data, and tell you exactly what's happening across your entire pipeline. And, a lot of folks, when you speak to them, from organizations, or the ones who are doing multi-touch attribution modeling, are usually accounting for sales and marketing. And again, this usually goes back to the fact, that that's just where they have their tool sets kind of stem from. But, I'm starting to see more and more folks, actually start to leverage, whether it just be even the sourced and influenced touch points, or if you get much more granular, at Branch, what we did is we basically we covered every single partner touch point, and each one of them would get labeled at the end of that touch point on whether the partner was helpful, were they unhelpful, or did we help them? And if they were helpful, you're okay, what exactly happened? Did we get an introduction? Did we get a recommendation? Did we get information? All of this was sent directly into Salesforce, which allowed us to run like reporting or dashboards that we can build out in Salesforce to tell us, okay, which partners are driving the most business, which ones are driving, which one like relationships are equitable, which ones are not, what are the biggest deals that we're working on for the year that partnerships are not involved on, because remember, if you get partners involved, it's going to have a higher probability of closing. But all of that data, stems from the fact that we actually track every partner touch point. This doesn't omit the fact that, if we have all these different touch points, you can also layer on sourced and influenced on top of it. But the key thing is okay, if you're tracking every touch point, then you can really get a much more holistic understanding, very similar to how in sales, they're tracking every single email or every single meeting, or in marketing, tracking, every single marketing touch point, whether it be a case study, a webinar, a site visit. Getting all this data is what you ultimately can do to plug into, this is a screenshot of Visible, where you can actually plug that in and you can say, okay, here's our entire pipeline and all of these sales activities reported in from outreach, all of these marketing activities reported in from Marketo, all the BD activities or partner activities were plugged in from Partnered. And then we spent more time than I care to admit, because every single part of your organization is going to argue that their touch points are worth more than everybody else's. So that's more of the art than the science. Just know that if you're going to go down this route, you got to prepare for that war. But yeah, it will take a little bit of, internal meeting across all of the various teams to understand, to basically level set on what every single touch point should be. But then you could plug that into, a system like Visible, like we're showing here. And then Visible is going to run in the background, ingesting all of those data points and giving you a very easy to comprehend, either pipeline dashboard, or even allowing you to click in on a specific opportunity so that you can see, how much each part of the organization accounted for. So I know that's a lot, and there are a lot more layers to this onion of multi-touch attribution, but for purposes of right now, are there any questions that I can answer just holistic or more of a high level?
I think it would be any knowledge we have around causation versus correlation, because that's always what comes back around the multi-touch. It's well, was it really the partner? Was it the customer who driving it? That is anything we know about that would be useful, even if it's experimental data, like to run an experiment or something, some way to triangulate. That'd be useful.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's a really tough one, Sunir. I think one of the things that at least we have come to grips with is if there's a large enough sample size, eventually you can really start to understand, what are the real drivers, so not necessarily, I think if you zoom in on one particular deal, it's tough to say okay, how much of this could be correlation versus causation. But when you zoom that out over 50, 100, 500, 1,000 deals, you can really start to holistically understand, what are the bigger touch points that are driving, the levers of your business, if you will, So,
I don't ask questions, Adam.
Sorry?
I don't ask easy questions.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. Yeah. And I think, that's where, if the sample size is small enough, you could very easily say, hey, this one particular deal, maybe they were moving quicker for 1,000 other different reasons. But once there's enough statistically significant data, I think it makes that a little bit easier.
One thing that I found useful is qualitative triangulation. So you do qualitative studies of the customer base to see what was going on in their mind. Because you can only measure their behavior on the outside, but you can't measure what influenced them on the inside without talking to them. Yep. So that might be a useful thing to do. How to qualitative analyze the customers to see what's actually happening.
I'd be curious too, because I feel as you're saying, there are so many variables like brand equity, things that the economy, things that necessarily can't be tracked. Were you able to take these models at your company, make changes according to what the model was putting out, and then see the positive effects from it?
Yeah, so we rolled this out, I think, roughly 6 months ago at Branch. It took us roughly 3 months, I would say, or a quarter to fine tune the model, because there's always you're going to put in a lot of assumptions into the model from the beginning, and then you're going to find out this seems like it's skewing a little bit more towards marketing or skewing a little bit more towards sales. So it takes a little bit of time to also fine tune the model once you have it. And then I think like, once you start to actually get the output of it, it really makes like, forecasting and stuff like that much easier. Because you can understand, okay, hey, if this is how much we're expecting to get or how much we've drove historically from each part of the organization, then you can also forecast, okay, moving forward, like with real data, like we expect that you guys are going to be able to drive, this amount. So we started using it for more planning. And then also like the one other thing is like, even at, like at Branch, for example, we would start compensating like our various teams more on the marketing and the partnership side based upon like this data, so that it's not necessarily sourced and like influenced per se, but actually being able to see, how much are you on a percentage basis driving across these deals, which we found to be a more accurate like heuristic on and actually wound up making it look much better for the partnership teams and the marketing teams than just like sourced or influenced. So I think it's not only more accurate in my personal opinion, but it was also like beneficial for both the marketing org and the partnership org, because they actually were getting more of the credit, which they should have been getting in the first place, frankly.
I'd be curious, is anyone else currently doing this at the organization? We are too small to be having anything like this in place, but I'd be curious if any of the rest of you have implemented this. No?
It's a good spot to be.
Work in progress, Kelly.
When I was at FreshBooks and I was at OLARC and at Social Text, in both three places, I implemented a data warehouse. Pretty much the second thing I did after setting the marketing strategy, which the CEOs were wondering why I'm wasting so much time doing this, but it was the basis of all our experiments in the future, which helped us accelerate a lot faster. So it's worth doing something, even if it's hard.
You got to start somewhere. Like, I think, Kelly, the key is to like just pick one or two and just track something, anything. You can always add a layer. You can't do this out of the gates. Like, it would drain too much of your own time, team, and the rest of the organization. So, I'm sure even Adam, like, you didn't start with this, right? Like, no.
Yeah. And there's a reason, like to Evan's point, like the reason why I put this as advanced is like, I mean, maybe 1 out of, 10 or probably 20 or even like 50 organizations is really doing this, at least today. But it's also like an iterative approach to Evan's point, like, I mean, in order, like you have to crawl to walk to run, so it really starts with, okay, if you're not tracking anything, just start tracking stuff, from the beginning. Even throughout that process, you're going to realize like a lot from just the actual tracking portion. And then you can start to get like to more of like the intermediate and get a little bit more sophisticated. But it really, like in order to invest in something like this, like it's going to take resources, both in terms of the tooling, but it also it will take a decent amount of time. Like for Branch specifically, the organization is like 6 years old. We didn't roll this out until 5 years into our journey, so only over the past year. And this like soup to nuts to get it to a point where it's like a really humming machine, like probably took us close to a year, 6 months of planning, 3 months of actually execution, and then 3 months of like actually like tweaking everything to make sure that we got it right.
Another thing you can do is also leverage the other teams who need the same modeling. So product and sales both need the same modeling for themselves. And so you're just another group benefiting from the same attribution. So try to recruit other teams and their resources.
And now that you found your model, Adam, do you need to update it quite often, or?
Yeah, I mean, what's cool is once you get everything working, like, I mean, unless like any of your tooling breaks for whatever reason, it will, like the sales attribution software like Visible or Engagio is going to continue, sucking in all of the like information. And then it will just be running everything on top. So you can even get it down to like having this reporting sent to your inbox on like, a daily, weekly basis or what have you. But it's really helpful for like the head of sales, your CRO, even like CEO to be able to understand like where is the health of the business, and like where is your revenue coming from. But then more tactically is like for each business unit to really understand like all the nuances of how like their actions are impacting sales.
And were you able to find some pattern to help you close deal faster?
Yeah. So for us, I mean, the biggest learnings were really on like more of the marketing and the partnership side. And like for marketing, like for example, without divulging too much information, like there was like a specific sequence, that was like that we tend to hone in on. We're still testing it, like actually applying like that learning. But we use this data to understand what that like sequence was. And then for partnerships, like one of the biggest learnings was just how impactful that they actually were, which allowed us to like dedicate additional headcount towards partnerships.
Once you dedicated more fund to the partnership team, do you need to recalibrate the whole model? Because if you add more money in example in partnership, you need all the model needs to be updated.
Yeah, not the way that we did our multi-touch model, but there are ways, like if you want to like show how much, like it's more common in marketing marketing multi-touch models, where if there is a type of conversion event, like how much money did you spend on it, so how much did the case study cost, or how much did your marketing campaign cost, and then you can amortize that over the actual conversion action, so you can get like a cost per conversion event. But in like most sales attribution models, like that's less relevant.
For more great insights on partnerships and software, like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.